2,000 languages, but united in similar interests. As news breaks, we give you in-depth analysis around Africa every Monday on Core TV News.
Migrants are people who move from one part of the country to another to search for either a good job or a better life. That's the situation of Africa. Over 70,000 Africans die each year in the quest to go to Europe to look for a better life. And of course, the big question falls back to the leaders of the continent here. How well have they been running the country? And of course, how well have they been managing the continent to save their citizens from migrating? Biodo Showme is joining me and he'll be throwing more light to the topic today on Around Africa. Good to have you on the program.
I'm pleased to be here.
All right, of course. The big question is, why always Africa? Sometimes, you know, when we look at Africa, we always get the other side of the stories. Africa's, if you want to calculate, to say at least 700 Africans weekly die in either Melilla border, seashores, trying to cross over Europe. Why? Why always Africa?
Yeah, it's inevitable. If you look at the situation, the fact of the matter is Africa has just been maligned, you know, by Western media. Nobody has been able to stop migration. If you look at the rest part of the world, people still move from one place to the other. Romanians moving into UK, into other EU countries in search of greener pastures. In the case of Africa, you need to go back to the pre-colonial times, 1886 Berlin Conference, where Africa was partitioned, and then along political lines, disregarding ethnic issues, you know, the configurations at that point in time. Then moving up to the colonial times, when, particularly before the Second World War, when Africans were forcefully taken to go and fight in the war, in the Second World War. They were conscripted. Then after the Second World War, you have the colonial master also, the issue of forced labor came into it, moving people from one place to the other to work in plantation, up to the contemporary times when we have the impact of globalization. Globalization has its own burden. The burden of globalization is migration, increased migration. Particularly when you have companies and industries, both private sector and government, setting up, you know, the research and factories are in, and development are in European capital. You have the factories in Asia and so many other countries. People are bound to drift towards where they can find employment. And it's true when you look at even Nigeria, for instance, where you have many companies situated around the capital, or the former capital, Lagos. You are bound to have drift towards Lagos. And that is the side effect of globalization, that people are bound to drift towards that. If you look at Kenya, for instance, or the Republic of Cameroon, where they have farm settlements and more development going on in the rural areas now, we've seen intra-rural migration. That is, people moving from the cities to look for job in those areas. So a lot of it depends on the impact of policies, industrial policies. It depends on the impact of globalization. And that is why it's not a straightforward matter. People are bound to move, are bound to drift to where they can get what they want. There are also other factors when you look at war. It's another issue. With this issue of democracy, the West pushing for African countries to, you know, take along its own mode of governance. Then we've seen renewed tensions, you know, between people and amongst different ethnic nationalities. And that itself is also generating some of the migration which we see currently.
All right, of course. Maybe very early on the show, but we may have to go for a very quick break right now. And then when we come back from this break, we'll be digging deep to why Africans migrate, because the death rate is really, really unfair on the continent. And of course, what are the African leaders, African Union, doing to, to reduce the level of migrants crossing borders? We'll be back after this time. Stay with us.
One continent, 54 countries, over 2,000 languages, but united in similar interests. As news breaks, we give you in-depth analysis around Africa every Monday on Core TV News.
TV News live from anywhere in the world on our website www.coretvnews.com. Click on Live TV on our website and watch us live.
And welcome to Core TV Primetime Days.
To follow us on Twitter, click on Twitter icon on our website. On Facebook, click on the Facebook and YouTube to see all our previous news production. You can also watch us live on YouTube. Click Core TV, leave a space, then News. Core TV News, a 24-hour news station.
A very big thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Around Africa on Core TV News. And of course, today we've been looking at the African migrants that migrate every year to Africa. And of course, report says that 700 African migrants, beg your pardon, lose their life every month on a monthly basis. And of course, looking at the fact that some of the European countries that they are migrating to are also experiencing economic meltdown. How do you explain that?
Oh, yes. They're just about to come out of recession in Europe and America, but that will not affect migration because migration is actually following capital. Where in this era of globalization, it is easier to locate, to move industries from one country to the other, from one community to the other, because it goes along with where the cost of labor is cheaper. Just for instance, at a point in time, it was cheaper to employ people in China than in Wales. So many companies relocated from Wales to China. So the consequence of that is labor will move towards China. So whether there's recession or not, as long as productive activity is taking place, as long as opportunity for employment is there, people are bound to move.
Now, also look at the fact that Africa, really blessed with natural resources. Africa has got some zinc, we've got millets, and the agricultural sector is doing very well. And of course, with this evolution of oil, sometimes I wonder why people still move. What are the government doing?
Yeah, because we are not doing enough. We have crude oil, but we've not turned it into refined petroleum products in the sense that we get the crude oil out of the ground and just simply export it without actually creating the refineries, to refine them so that we can create employment here and also export it and make wealth. So we leave that to other countries, create employment in other countries through importation of petroleum products. We have raw materials. We're exporting most of our raw materials. Look at cocoa, for instance. We take the cocoa, we don't turn it into chocolate bars. We send them to Europe, and those things are re-exported back to us in form of manufactured goods. The industries manufacturing the chocolate bars that we eat in Nigeria today are in Europe. And therefore, we are creating employment in those communities at our own expense. Consequently, Nigerians will look at the opportunities, where job opportunities exist, and then drift towards the place. So that is why you see people moving towards where economic activities are taking place. It's inevitable.
Now, should African leaders generally bring out a policy to criminalize illegal migrants?
Well, I don't really think so, because we need to look at the causes of illegal migration. In many cases, it's due to dysfunctional societies or countries like Somalia, where the government has literally collapsed, is a failed state. Then you have a case like Central African Republic. Currently, we have 130,000 people from Central African Republic, refugees in Chad, and close to, according to United Nations Refugees Commission, close to about 220,000 people from Central African Republic are now in Cameroon. They didn't go in legally through the borders, going through immigration controls. They went because they had no choice. Even at a point, Chad had to create a corridor for people to move, into that country to escape being killed. The anti-Balaka Christian group chasing the Seleka people, killing the Muslims there, the reprisal killings going on in Central African Republic. Same thing if you take the case of Libya. So many Libyans are leaving the shores of Libya, trying to escape to Italy or Spain, simply because Libya is in turmoil, So you can't really criminalize illegal migration in that way, because people need to survive and they need to exist. There are cases of serious violations, like somebody, being a stowaway on a plane, you know, trying to stow away, hiding inside the... Yeah, those are extreme cases, but you have to look at reasons why people would choose to risk their lives, you know, doing that than, you know, staying in their country. It's still the issue of, it could be environmental, economic, social, political. So these are the real reasons. And when you have that, we need to address the cause of the problem, not to criminalize, you know, the conduct of those who are trying to, who are not stakeholders in their own economy, who are trying to earn a living elsewhere.
Now, in July, South Africa formally extended the stay of some Somalians who came into the country through some kind of ways that they were recognized by the government. They knew, okay, at a point they needed refuge from their homes, and South Africa accommodated them. And just 2 months ago, they gave them, they extended their stay. For most of them that didn't want to go back to that part of the country, they gave them, I think, another 3 months stay. Now, it means some migrants, most times, they enter into a country legally, notifying the government and all of that. Now, you are saying that it shouldn't be criminalized. Now, if it's not criminalized, how well can it be checked? Because Africans can't keep losing their lives year after year.
Yeah, it's policing the borders. That's the key. We can't criminalize people simply because government fail to discharge their own obligation of securing the borders of a country. We know what the problem is. Government has a role to ensure that life is meaningful, you know, for the people. There are poor people in Europe and America and other climes. What they do is they have a welfare package, you know, to help the people to stay within their own community, stay within their own country. In Nigeria, for instance, the Nigerian Constitution, Chapter 2 clearly states that the government has an obligation, you know, to provide welfare if you are unemployed. But it's not justiciable. You can't go to court to enforce it. And as long as we have that situation and government is not living up to it, I know that some few governments are trying to address it, some of the state governments, Osun and Ekiti, you know, but as long as largely we have that situation where people are left with nothing, they are not stakeholders in their own economy. They wake up in the morning, they don't know what to eat, they don't know what to eat in the afternoon, they don't know what to eat in the night, and they see people living in affluence. So once the inequality, you know, between the rich and the poor, the gap keeps widening. Once we have that situation, we're bound to have people thinking of, look, how do I survive? Is either you take to crime or you migrate, and that is what we're seeing currently. Even though this inequality in this divide, you know, uneven divide between the rich and poor exists in other climes, but what you see is that in Britain, for instance, the rich are heavily taxed to provide welfare for the poor. In Nigeria, the rich hardly pay the tax to start with, not to talk of taxing them heavily to care for the poor. So it will be wrong to actually criminalize migration. In any case, no matter what we do, we will only end up creating, you know, millions of people, turn them into criminals. And do we really have the resources to build the prisons and put them in there? We don't.
Now, this brings us back to this very big one. Now, what is the role of African leaders, African Union, in the bid to provide better life? Because sometimes, just like we were discussing on the break, most of these African leaders travel, you know, they go to Europe, they go to other continents, and they've seen development, they've tested development, they know what it means. What is wrong with implementation of some of these things?
Yeah, there's a pull factor, there's a push factor. The push factor is what the African Union or African leaders can address. The pull factor is beyond their control. What do I mean by push factor? Push factor, when you look at, for instance, looking at the issue of industrial development of each country, developing agriculture to create employment for the people, that is within their control. You know, things like reducing industrial conflict by coming out with a fair, robust industrial relations system is within their control. The issue of providing power, energy, so that you can make the cost of production less, and then the private sector will be willing to invest in those countries where power is stable, you know, that's within their control. The issue of political stability, reducing ethnic tension through dialogue rather than war, is within their control. But there are other factors outside their control. That is the pull factor. The pull factor includes, for instance, the issue of globalization. The consequence of globalization is where capital is free, labor has to be free in migration. Because capital migration today is free. Everybody wants foreign direct investment in their country. People give a lot of incentives, to ensure that they can create factories and industries in your country. And the consequence of that is people that has to work in there. So part of those factors is that they will move to where the jobs are. That's one. Number two, when you have disparity in standard of living between the developed economics and the underdeveloped economy, you are bound to have the pull factor, because human beings naturally desire, to have a good life. So the pull factor will be because the standard of living is better in developed economies, people want to gravitate towards that. It's not necessarily unskilled people. You also have skilled people. Let me give a good example. Lecturers in the universities, for instance, doing a comparative job, including research with lecturers in Europe or in Malta or in Canada. You have people like doctors, medical doctors, actually saving lives, doing comparative job. You are bound to have what they call brain drain. They probably know that, look, I can have better income if I choose to work in other places. So they're likely going to move to those areas. And because it will cost those countries less to employ them than to train their own doctors, they're bound to have that. Go to UK now. Today, there are over 5,000 Nigerian doctors working in UK. Meanwhile, so many Nigerian hospitals are begging, for attention, begging for doctors. So we have this kind of problems. If you take, for instance, a country like Liberia, there is one doctor to 100,000 people. And Liberia has a population, I think, of about 4.4 million. So you can count the number of doctors on your hands. But Liberia has so many doctors outside Liberia. So these are the problems. We need to look at the push factor and the pull factor. The West, on their own part, on the pull factor, needs to help Africa, by ensuring that Africa has a fair opportunity, for trade and for industrial development, while the African leaders need to provide the conducive atmosphere in terms of infrastructural facilities, power, good roads, housing for the people, and we also need to look at the issue of creating more industries in the rural areas so that you can have drift, from urban centers, to rural areas, because where you have that, people are bound to move there. Then also we need to evolve our own ethnic conflict resolution mechanism, which I think AU can really take responsibility for that in a way that if we reduce tension in Africa, we are likely going to have less of displaced persons, internally displaced persons, and we are likely going to have less of refugees, fleeing abroad for asylum.
Now, should the Westerners make provisions for African migrants?
Yes, there has to be provision for it, because even if...
Now, don't also forget that they also have their own citizens to take care of.
Yes, migration is encouraged by all countries when it's positive. I can give you examples of why that is the case. For instance, the United States, have a provision, including Britain, for temporary admission for people who are fleeing conflict or fleeing persecution or their lives are at risk. That is allowed. There is a Geneva Convention which all countries in the world signed to. That is why you cannot close the door to migration, because of that convention, which all countries, signed up to, Nigeria also inclusive. So you must always make room for some migration into your country. Then don't also forget that there are countries like Canada with its own provision that, look, you can become a Canadian citizen, come and settle here if you are skilled and all that, because it's cheaper for them to take skilled labor, from other countries. Same thing, America has what they call national lottery visa system, whereby you can do that. If you qualify, you meet the criteria, then you can relocate to America. Those are being done on purpose. In the case of Britain, if you have £1 million to invest in UK, then you'll be given right to permanent residence in UK. You'll be allowed to live there. You'll be given what they call indefinite leave to remain. So those are deliberate steps being taken by developed economics to attract either high-skilled manpower from Africa or attract African wealth to their own economy. So in addition, with if you consider that and take that along with the Geneva Convention, you will realize that it is impossible to close migration. There will always be space for migration, and countries are making provision for that.
Now, finally, before I let you go on the program today, how can we discourage Africans from really migrating? Because for me, it worries me when I look at some of those visuals we've showed on the program today, and then we see how Africans, lose their life on high sea, and for some of them that tries to cross the Melilla border, of course, even if the land border between Morocco and Spain. Of course, we also have another land border that links Egypt and Israel. And sometimes the way some of them end up hurts me. But how well can we really reduce migration?
Yeah, we can do it. One, there's a global responsibility on migration, while the illegal migration aspect is the real problem. Controlled migration is not a problem. So I believe we are concerned with illegal migration
exactly.
in this case. There's a global responsibility to ensure that, one, governments in each country behave responsibly towards their citizens in a way that if people are not being persecuted, they won't have the reasons, to flee. There's a global responsibility to ensure that the United Nations is able to step in, and resolve problems earlier enough before they become major conflicts, to prevent people becoming victims of war. There is also a global responsibility to ensure that there is a fairer trade system whereby Africa is not resources is not being depleted, at the expense of Africans, to the benefit of developed economies. So we need to look at a fair trade system. The developed economies need to redirect some of the investment, into critical areas in Africa with a view to create employment, and help stem illegal migration. And it's not only employment for skilled workers, also unskilled workers. African leaders themselves need to think inwards. How do we, ensure that we police our borders and ensure that people are not necessarily taking risk with their lives? Because the first duty of any government anywhere in the world is the security of lives and property. So if a government cannot, secure the lives of their own citizens, it's failing in its own obligation. If that means patrolling the border, having sealed border, we need to do that. But at the same time, we need to look at the causes of illegal migration, which is poverty, some of it social, economic, environment. There are some which you can't control. Let me give you a good example of that. The W Forest Reserve, between Benin Republic, Niger Republic, Burkina Faso, there's little or nothing you can do about that because that is for migration. It was actually created by the French, in 1920, I think. Now is the 13th or 14th one existing in the world. Right there, people move, they grow cotton, they do all manners of things. And then you have, the Hausa, the Fulani herdsmen, migrating from one country through those reserve to other countries. So you have that axis, which is also legal migration. That cannot be illegal migration because it's actually serving the purpose for which it was created. So government needs to look at more of being more responsible towards their own citizens, creating employment, halting drift from the rural to the urban, because people get frustrated when they move from the rural to the urban, they can't get employment, they now start thinking of taking risk with their own lives. So we need to look at how do we provide infrastructure in the rural areas, how do we create industries, create farm settlement, and help retain people, in the rural areas.
Very well said. Thank you very much, Biodun Shomi, for coming on the program.
It's my pleasure.
And of course, you've really done justice to the migration. And of course, we just hope that Africans generally, and especially the leaders, I think they have to wake up to their responsibility of making Africa a really good place for all its inhabitants. That's how far we can go around Africa today. My name is Brownson Wana. Very big thanks for watching. We'll be back again next week. Have a wonderful day.
One continent, 54 countries, over 2,000 languages, but united in similar interests. As Newsbreaks, we give you in-depth analysis around Africa every Monday on Core TV News.